Hello, my name is Dr. Ian Cohen, and I'm reaching you from my home office. And today we're going to talk about Alzheimer's disease and how we diagnose it, specifically the stages of Alzheimer's disease. I work at Toronto Memory Program. I'm one of the physicians in our memory clinic, and I work as an investigator in our clinical trial program. We are one of the largest and busiest clinical trial sites in Canada, looking at Alzheimer's disease treatments, prevention, and new tests. So the purpose of today's presentation is to provide an understanding of the natural progression of Alzheimer's disease. What is Alzheimer's disease? Well, it's a chronic neurodegenerative disease. It destroys brain cells, and in the process, it causes a decline in memory and other areas of thinking ability that deteriorates over time. Alzheimer's is not a part of normal aging. And we use terms to describe the different stages of Alzheimer's. So subjective cognitive decline would be one of the earliest symptomatic stages, where a person's aware of some symptoms, but not showing any objective evidence of impairment. And then over time, the disease progresses to mild cognitive impairment and dementia. However, these terms are not specific to Alzheimer's disease, meaning other conditions could present, such as vascular dementia or Lewy body dementia or frontotemporal dementia, with this gradual progression of symptoms. So what exactly does Alzheimer's disease look like? Well, it's a 30-year disease. And the first 15 years are silent. We call those the preclinical stage. And what you can see here on the left-hand side is cognitive function. And across the bottom is the duration of these periods. So preclinical means that there are no symptoms, but that underneath in the background, Alzheimer's pathology is slowly accumulating. Now, in the very last part of this preclinical stage would be the stage we call subjective cognitive decline. And what is that? Well, or preclinical Alzheimer's disease might be normal cognition. There are no symptoms, or this subjective cognitive decline, as I mentioned, where there may be some awareness by the person that there's a change in their symptoms. They might not be as clear about their memory, or they might have to write more notes. So they're aware of a change. But when we go and test them, their cognitive testing is normal. The only way we can actually diagnose this stage as it relates to Alzheimer's disease would be to do a special biomarker test that we're going to discuss otherwise. And this is obviously a big problem in this stage because people are worried, well, my memory is changing. Is this Alzheimer's disease? The duration of this period as it relates to Alzheimer's disease is about 15 to 20 years. Now, if you look a little bit to the right of that, on that dotted curve, you'll see MCI. So MCI stands for mild cognitive impairment. Mild cognitive impairment is defined by symptoms of decline in at least one domain of cognition. And in Alzheimer's disease, the usual presentation is short-term memory, but in some cases, it's actually a language problem. Now, when we do the cognitive testing, such as the Montreal cognitive test, there is abnormality on the test and usually consistent with the area of difficulty. So it might be that the person can't remember a list of 5 words, for example. And the key here is that the person still remains independent in their function, meaning doing their banking, their driving, looking after their medicine, cooking, cleaning. They may need to write notes or have some strategies, but they're still doing them by themselves. The duration of this period is about 5 years long. And now if you look to the far right, you'll see on that curve the dementia stage. And that's the stage that most people are familiar with, where this is actually the final stage of the disease. And the average duration of time is about 10 years. And when people ask, well, is it dementia or is it Alzheimer's? People present to us with dementia, and that describes the symptomatic stage that they're at, but we still have to figure out whether it's Alzheimer's disease that's causing it. So in the dementia stage, whether it's dementia from Alzheimer's or other conditions, there's a decline in at least 2 domains of cognition: short-term memory, language problems. People can't plan out or organize themselves. They might not be able to focus, and that's the classic description of leaving the pot on the stove to burn. They might get lost when they're driving. And now there's a loss of independent function, meaning some of the things that they used to do by themselves entirely, now someone else has taken over. And that might be the family's helping with banking, or in fact, they've had to stop driving and someone else is driving them. They can't keep track of their medicine. They can't follow a recipe or make a meal. Those would be examples. And again, on their cognitive testing, and now we might switch to a different test called the mini mental state exam, or the MMSE. Their test is now abnormal and generally in a few areas. Dementia is broken down into 3 stages known as mild, moderate, and severe, and the overall average duration is about 10 years, but that varies significantly, and the rate of progression varies individually. So what causes Alzheimer's disease? Well, it's an accumulation of 2 abnormal proteins. The first, that happens silently over many years in that first stage we talked about, is the buildup of a protein called amyloid into the formation of plaques. And this is a slide of someone who passed away from Alzheimer's disease, and it shows with those arrows what those plaques look like. After many years of amyloid accumulation, even before symptoms develop, once damage starts to occur in the cells start to break down. And one of the reasons they break down is because of an impairment of another protein called tau, which you see on the left, and they form structures known as tangles. And this is highlighted by these arrows. Now, unfortunately, you can't see these on a CAT scan or an MRI or in blood work in regular practice. So how does it work when you go see your doctor and they're concerned you have dementia and you're trying to figure out whether it's Alzheimer's or what is it? Well, first we have to rule out other conditions. And the way that we do that is we do a CAT scan or an MRI. We might do some blood work. And what we're looking for is signs of strokes or tumors or thyroid problems. Once those are ruled out, then we apply some clinical criteria. So we might describe someone as having either possible Alzheimer's or probable Alzheimer's, but we could never say definitively until someone actually passed away, and we could look at their tissue of their brain and stain it and see these plaques and tangles. So for these clinical criteria we've been using for years and years, there's no biomarker test. There's no way to confirm that this is the disease until someone passes away. And this is still pretty much how it's practiced in the community. The difference in our hands is that now, with research trials and all the work that's gone on, there is a pathological way to detect Alzheimer's, presence of Alzheimer's, before someone passes away by a number of different biomarker tests. So these would be, the markers would be the amyloid and tau. One is a PET scan. That's a special picture of a brain, not routinely done in regular practice, where we can see this amyloid plaque accumulation. So we could see it years before symptoms, or in the mild cognitive impairment, or in the dementia stage. The other way we can detect levels of this amyloid or tau being abnormal is by collecting some spinal fluid and sending that off to a lab to be measured. And the third way now is we have in research some blood tests for Alzheimer's. We can actually measure the level of amyloid or tau. But again, these aren't tests that your doctor has access to at the moment. They are tests that are part of a research study. So one of the reasons that people participate in research is so that they can determine, is there dementia or their mild cognitive impairment on the basis of Alzheimer's, because we can access these biomarker tests at the beginning of the study. So why do we do research? Well, it's to either find new prevention strategies or medications to, let's say, remove the amyloid before it can even build up into symptoms. So this would be in that preclinical group, or same or similar or different approaches to slow the progression in people who already have mild cognitive impairment or mild dementia. Might be directed at the amyloid, might be directed at the tau, or it might be directed at other things. And the third is to help the symptoms, meaning in someone who's advanced to the moderate or severe dementia stage, there's treatments that we're looking at that might help the person function a little bit more independently for longer. And many clinical trials are taking place at Toronto Memory Program for all stages of this disease. So thank you very much for joining me today for this brief conversation. And I hope you've learned something, and we look forward to hearing from you if you have questions.